Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Wednesday, September the 2nd, 2020. On this edition of the Politicrat, change versus chaos. That is coming up next. Welcome back. Before getting into the subject matter of this episode, just wanted to talk about a couple of things that have happened, of course, in the last few hours in the news. The victory in Massachusetts in the Democratic primary for Ed Markey, the progressive, in the Senate. He handed the Kennedy dynastic family their first defeat in their state of Massachusetts in the history of the Kennedys. And Ed Markey, the progressive, won easily by a 2-1 margin over Joe Kennedy III. And it was something that a lot of people expected, a lot of people hoped for, certainly I did, and a lot of people were very happy about. You had Joe Kennedy III, who is in the House of Representatives, a Democrat, who really should not have challenged Ed Markey, who has been doing a wonderful job for the state of Massachusetts. Joe Kennedy III was looking out for his political ambition. You want to speak about ambition. Joe Kennedy was full of it. The ambition. And maybe something else as well. But Joe Kennedy III, who is really more of a moderate Democrat, more of a centrist Democrat, more of the type of corporate Democrat that you have so much of now and have had so much of in the Democratic Party over the last 30 years plus, got taught a valuable lesson last night. Do not upset an apple cart when the sales are through the roof. I hope that Joe Kennedy goes home and reflects on that lesson. Joe Kennedy was backed by Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi, among numerous other more moderate and centrist Democrats. And they all had egg on their faces last night. So I want to say congratulations to Senator Ed Markey. He is somebody who has been fighting for progressive values for a long time. He's someone who used to be in the House of Representatives. He then became a senator, and he was one of the co-sponsors of the Green New Deal with AOC and Bernie Sanders. So this is an important victory for the progressive movement from last night. And it continues to go, and I'll talk about that a little bit in the main part of this episode. The other thing that is going on right now is a lot of noise. First of all, I should say, before I get to that, there were written requests sent to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mike Milley, or Mark Milley, I believe is his name, and two House of Representatives sent letter requests to him and to the Pentagon Chief, Mike Esper, or Mark Esper. I always forget what his name is. But what you have here is two, and this did not get reported. These are two House Democrats, Elisa Slotkin and Mikey Sherrill, both of whom I believe have served in the military. And it's Mark Milley, who is the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the chairman there, who got these written requests and sent them back, responded to them. But Mark Esper, the defense secretary, has not yet done so. And the deadline for that response is tomorrow evening. And it was all in reference to whether or not Donald Trump's going to leave. Now, look, as I've said before, Donald Trump will leave if he loses this election, which I think he will. And I'll get to that as well in a few moments. He will leave. The simple fact is this. If Donald Trump loses this election in November, he will leave. And as I've said before, this kind of thing that's being asked by the media has to stop. And I think it has, and I've alluded to it before. I just think that it's just absolutely ridiculous of the media. And look, I know that this guy is certainly someone who doesn't play by any rules. But the order of the day is that when the new person is sworn in as president, Joe Biden, if that is to be the case based on the election coming up, as soon as that person is sworn in, Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. I hate to even put the word president and Donald Trump in the same sentence. Even now, I have the only time you've heard me say, apart from just now, that he's president, or even I've never even said the word president and then his name after it. I've not said that because he is not one. He got there illegitimately, and quite frankly, there is absolutely no indication that he's behaved like one. He certainly is not one. And he certainly is not one with this coronavirus crisis. He is not a leader at all. He has been very irresponsible. And that was all predictable based on what some of us know about Donald Trump. So let's cut out this nonsense about will he leave, won't he? And again, as I've said before, I think that when people start to ask that kind of a question in the media, it is on a subliminal level designed to stoke doubt and fear in the voter, so that the voter hears that. Some people might hear that, not everybody, but some people might hear that and go, well, if he may not leave, why am I going to vote? There's going to be a small percentage of people who think that way. But a small percentage of people perhaps thinking that way is too many people. So I really do think that people in the media need to be more responsible. I think people are getting a little better, but then there's evidence that that is not the case. The New York Times continues to print headlines that have lots of false equivalency in them, have lots of racist genuflections in them, have lots of, oh, well, this thing is the same as that, the false equivalency, when it clearly is not. And you still have people on these news broadcasts talking about, or rather inviting people on who just gaslight. CNN did that with someone that they had on. I'm not even going to mention who it is and who the person is who interviewed this individual, because it's just unnecessary attention. And the two of them are going back and forth, and the Trump person was completely lying like a rug and just saying all this nonsense and gaslighting. And, the usual talking over each other kind of thing so you can't hear anything. So this stuff is just noise right now. And that's the point of what I'm saying, at least with this last portion. All of this stuff that's scandalous and even, something that we have to focus on issues. And I've talked about this before, especially on Twitter recently. And I'm going to continue to talk about it because as we get closer to this election, we need the media to be more responsible, but we need to be the ones putting out the message about the issues. The issues. And I get it. There are people out there who don't vote based on issues. I've talked about this just yesterday. But it is important to focus on issues. And the corporate news media has no interest in doing that. And it has not shown any interest in doing that for many, many years. You've got people starving out here. You've got food lines in all kinds of neighborhoods. You've got middle class, working class people on food lines, millions of people all across the country waiting in lines for food. That is a Depression era economy. And that's the kind of thing that the media is not going to touch. Christine Romans talked about the economy being bad, and it's not going to be, according to economic experts, it's not going to be an economy again that is going to get out of this deep hole it's in until maybe next year, summer of next year. That's another year from now. I'll play that audio for you in a few moments, actually. But the media need to start talking about the issues that matter to the American public, instead of all of the tabloid scandalized things. And even though there was a really good interview yesterday, I kind of think that hour or 2 hours, and we've got some more stuff coming up today, I can't help but think that some of these hours on cable news can be better spent educating the American public about the issues at stake. Social Security, about the fact that Social Security will be destroyed if Donald Trump gets another 4 years. About the fact that the disability payments will stop in the next year or so. About the fact that Social Security, for the most part, will be gone. It will be gone. No more payments within 3 years. And it would be irreversible, by the way. And about the fact that Medicare would be stopped dead in its tracks. About the fact that Donald Trump's budget for the fiscal year 2021 shows and calls for massive cuts, billions and billions of dollars of cuts, more than $45 billion of cuts in Social Security disability income, and something like $85 billion of cuts to Medicare. Those are time-honored institutions in this country. Since the 1960s, we've had Medicare in this country, 1967 under LBJ. At least 80% of your medical costs are covered, and then the Medicare gap is the 20%. That's because the Republicans in the Senate who were doing this deal said, we're not going to go along with this unless you allow for that 20%, which is really a kickback to these companies. But look, the point is that Medicare's been here since 1967. And that's part of the Great Society. That's the Great Society programs that LBJ put in. And we've had Social Security in this country since 1935, and FDR signed it into law. Both of these are Democratic presidents. Both of these are people who have not had, of course, the straightforward, squeaky clean images, because who does in politics? But these are institutions, Social Security and Medicare, that are under threat. And so the media needs to be talking about these things. Most of the people who watch these cable networks are people over the age of 60. And especially now with coronavirus continuing to kill thousands of people. I mean, every day about 1,000 people die in this country, in the United States, from coronavirus. And what the media is not doing is educating people about the fact that the Social Security that many of the people watching these networks are so reliant upon and so cherishing and so dependent on, and even that money is not nearly enough for them and as much as it used to be. That Social Security is going to wither away and disappear in the next year when it comes to disability payments, and in the next 3 years when it comes to regular payments. And it's irreversible. These are irreversible measures. And yet you hear nothing about it on the cable news channels in the United States. You hear absolutely nothing about it in the corporate news media at all. It's not on CNN or MSNBC. And it certainly isn't on Fox. So the media needs to be responsible here and actually educate its populace instead of stuffing it with tabloid popcorn. And I honestly believe that once you have a better educated electorate, you will see that electorate act in its interests, in its own best interests. But when you ply them with garbage and lies and gaslighting and all this stuff that's not important, all this noise, as I said earlier, you're going to have people confused, people acting against their own best interests economically, and you're going to have people afraid, which is what Donald Trump has done to people. He has made them afraid. And part of the reason why that has succeeded in some great measure, actually, for many people, educated and not, is because the corporate news media is not properly calling out these things. And any pundit that is on the air is not doing the kind of job that they need to do. I get it. It's not the job of the corporate news media to say, vote Donald Trump out. But it is the job of the corporate news media and any media at all, no matter where it is, to actually really raise questions and get people on who will do that. Now, look, there have been cases where some of these networks have done that. MSNBC has done it every now and again. CNN has done it once or twice. I think Brian Stelter the other day, I think, did a very good job when he invited on Jason Stanley, who is someone who's written about fascism and written about all these things. I think that's important. And it's important to talk about those things. But I also think it's important to talk about these other issues. Because I still think that when you talk about things like this, for some people, they just tune out. And I don't think they should be tuning out when people are literally warning of Nazi Germany. That's the first sign of trouble right there, when you have people actually tuning out. Some people may tune out on these things. But I don't think you should. But I also think you should be thinking about these other issues: Social Security, Medicare, the environment, the right to choose, voting, healthcare in general, education, how education has been defunded in this country for decades, certainly from Ronald Reagan on, with the Democrats putting more money into it and then the Republicans, when they get in, stripping money away from it. That's how it's been on education. It's been this complete ping pong. When a Democrat is in the White House, they up the money for education. When a Republican is in the White House, they strip money away from education. But in the last 40 years or so, that money has progressively been stripped out overall, and the standards have been changed, and you have a very poor education system in this country, which is why we are where we are in a great many respects. Issues of immigration are very important. Issues of dealing with the crisis in the farming industry and how farmers are really taking a beating. I mean, they really are. Farmers are not faring well. A lot of this is because of the Donald Trump trade wars. These idiotic things he did with China, which has hurt these farmers. That's not being talked about in the media. The issues of homelessness aren't being talked about. I mean, W. Kamau Bell did a really good episode the other day, and the fact that it was the last episode in this new season of his show, United Shades of America, which I thought was a very good show. And that's the first time I've seen it this season. I did not see any of the other previous seasons, and only this season's episodes, which literally around 8 episodes or so, 6 or 7 or 8. It was a very short season. I don't know if that's how it normally is, but the point is that Kamau Bell did some very good episodes. I thought that all of them were very good, especially I thought the last one was very good, dealt with homelessness, and that never gets talked about on the air, very rarely. and it's always in conjunction with some other issue. So these are all issues, the economy, jobs. These are all the things that I want to hear more discussions about on cable. But, you're not going to see that. That's the reality. You're not going to see it. So that means that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have to continue to hit those issues, to talk about those issues, to deal with those issues, criminal justice, and the police completely dismantling the way policing is done in this country. All of those things have to be dealt with. Dealing with crime, dealing with all of these things, the unemployment situation. These things have, because the media is not having real discussions about that. And they are still sleeping. These pundits are still sleeping. Earlier this year, during the summertime, I talked about people getting on television and talking about, oh, this isn't really authoritarianism. It's not really fascism. It's just performative. And then, as you may know, if you're someone who listens regularly to this podcast, I had on the Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat of NYU, New York University. And she made it clear that she has many years of expertise. She's studied these issues. She's written and researched on these issues. She's presented theses on these issues. Lots of theses she's done. She's written books on this. She's got another book on this coming out in a couple of months' time, actually, called Strongmen, Mussolini to the Present. And we had a conversation, and she outlined, no, this is not performative. What Donald Trump is doing is real, and it's extremely dangerous. And the way to deal with this is to vote, is to volunteer as a poll worker. That's exactly what Ruth Ben-Ghiat said on this podcast just a few weeks ago. So that is my message at the end of this first segment. That's my message. Be active, be proactive, stay active, stay proactive specifically. And offer to volunteer, particularly if you are a younger individual, meaning someone under the age of 40, I'd say. Volunteer to be a poll worker. Volunteer. Because your future is at stake here. And you don't hear any talk about young people on CNN. You don't really hear any talk about young people anywhere. Yes, there'll be the occasional story, but it'll usually be something about something heroic, something, oh, this person was able to do this or do that or the other. Okay, well, that's fine. But collectively, there needs to be conversations in the news media about youth, about people who are younger. They are our future. They are our present. It is very important. So I think that we have to start getting active right now. It doesn't matter how old you are. If you want to be a poll worker, sign up for it. If you want to be someone who does phone banking or someone who works remotely in conjunction with the boards of election and you want to get a job with them, there are vacancies. I've looked at these sites and doing my research for this document that I will have ready tomorrow, folks. Tomorrow, Thursday, I will have, finally, this comprehensive document that I've been working on and off for weeks and weeks now. And just in time, and I'm really excited about this. So anyway, I'm looking forward to unleashing that document soon, very soon. So we need to get people involved. And as I've researched for this document that I've put together that's almost ready, and we'll be ready again tomorrow, you see every one of these Secretary of State websites, they have vacancies for people to be poll workers. They beg people. They're saying, want to be a poll worker? Want to be a poll worker? And I remember I did that work. I was a precinct captain. I took time off work, and this was for the 2016 election. And being the superstitious person that I am in some respects, I am not going to do that this year. I'm not going to be a poll worker myself this year. Hypocrite. But for those of you out there who can't deal with the anxiety of the night of November 3rd, and of course, many people are already telling you that the result is not going to be known on November 3rd. It's going to be known maybe a week later. And I think that's about right. I think it's going to be roughly a week or so later, maybe a week to 2 weeks at the very most. So we're going to be on edge here, unfortunately, for a good few more days after November the 3rd. And that's a fact. That's a reality. We're all on edge. I think that is an honest assessment. No matter what your station in life, whether you're doing very well in life or whether you're not doing very well in life, I think that everybody is on edge. I think we all are. And these next few weeks and months are going to be testing. Well, I mean, look, the previous 30 weeks have been testing, right? I mean, previously, the previous 30 odd weeks of this year have been trying. Right? We've got less than what? Just thinking about it now, we've got less than 15 weeks of this year left. Less than 16 weeks left of the year. So the previous 38 odd weeks or whatever it is, the 30 some odd weeks have been trying, right? I mean, so we're going to just have a few more of those through the end of the year and into January, because that's the truth of this. We've just had a very brutal year, to say the least. Some of us have had a year that has changed our lives completely for many different reasons. Some of them very sad and tragic. Others of them for other reasons. So this is the thing I want to say. We have to be active because there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of dismay, and people are despondent, people are depressed, people are really anxious about what the future holds for many reasons. And I think that if you don't want to sit nervously on November 3rd, and if you don't want to resort to your substance of choice, you might want to think about getting involved, getting active, being a poll worker, being a poll watcher, observing the polls. Because most people are going to be coming into these situations by vote by mail. They're not going to be doing going to the precinct. I mean, there will be people who do. There will be a certain cross-section and segment of people who do go to the polls on election night. But a lot of people are going to vote by mail this time. A lot of people will. So if you want to be a poll watcher, I would, and whichever state you're in, I'd urge you to do that. I really would. Next up, chaos and change.
I'm Christine Romans in New York. The economic slump may linger. Half of the members of the prestigious National Association of Business Economics said growth won't recover until 2022. A majority don't expect the jobs market to fully recover until 2022 at the earliest. Worse, they forecast a 1 in 4 chance of a double-dip recession. It's a reminder that the stock market is not the economy. The S&P 500 and the NASDAQ have hit record highs, but millions are out of work and emergency stimulus has expired. The worry now, a so-called K-shaped recovery that widens the gap between winners and losers.
Welcome back. That was Christine Romans last week on CNN when she talked about the economy using the forecast and the research of this Economic Council. 2022 Now, in the last segment, I said 2021. It's actually 2022, according to these economic forecasters. The economy in this country is in a shambles. So that when you hear Donald Trump saying, oh, the economy is doing great, it's a bloomin' lie. Everything this guy says is a lie. Everything he says, it may have a kernel of truth somewhere, which is what makes it dangerous, but it's a lie. It's a lie. And I urge people to really think about that and understand that when he says that the economy is doing great, it's not. It's the opposite. It's absolutely tanking. You just heard from Christine Romans. The economy is tanking. It's in depression. Now, she said, well, double dip recession. Well, those are fancy terms, double dip, like you're at the circus. Oh, double dip, big tent. Double dip recession. That's a depression. Now, look, I know people who are economic forecasters will go, oh, no. Look, we have had job losses in this country not seen since the Great Depression, the Republican Great Depression, which is where I really want to start here in this portion of this episode, because we now are going to have a massive voter turnout. We've got to have it. We can't just presume it, but I think we will have it. I think people have had enough. And the Republican Great Depression of 1932, and prior to that, by the way, it started, 1928, 29. It was for all of the term of Herbert Hoover, a Republican. And he was in the White House as president, and he did not care at all about the state of the country's affairs. He turned a blind eye and a deaf ear to the well-being, or in this case, the lack of well-being of the country. Its financial health, its emotional health, its psychological health. Herbert Hoover didn't care. And as a result, he fiddled while the country burned. He was Nero. And as a result, we had this indifference, but we had a response at the ballot box. And it was FDR, who had been defeated in the previous election, who bounced back, either the previous election or the one before it, who bounced back and landslided the Republican Herbert Hoover out of the White House. The people said, we've had enough of this. We've had enough of the breadlines. We've had enough of people ending their lives by, jumping out of windows and literally doing that in this Great Depression, the Republican Great Depression. Because it's called that, because that's what it was originally called in the 1920s and 30s. Because it was Republicans, and it was certainly the indifference of Hoover on top of that exacerbated these serious problems. Nothing was being done by Hoover to even address the Great Depression, the Republican Great Depression. And so I offer that as a parable to now, because Donald Trump is doing nothing to address the economic depression that we have in this country. He's doing nothing about it. He's doing nothing about this virus. He's doing absolutely nothing about this virus. Among other things. No empathy for people that he doesn't like or that don't support him. He's trying to govern a one-sided country, only he is not governing at all. He is destroying. And what he wants to do, in my view, is to steal as much as he can before he goes out of the door, or before he's handcuffed. But we have to make that happen, which means we need a massive voter turnout. And I think that we're going to get that by hook or by clear force of will, by your proactivity. Because that's what it's going to take. And I see people on Twitter talking about, well, look at this poll, look at that poll, look at that poll over there, and look at that one over here, and look at that one behind you, and look at that one in front of you. Oh, Joe Biden's doing so well, and he's doing well nationally. Who cares? The election's not decided nationally. I don't care if he was up 100 points. That is irrelevant. So are all these other polls, by the way, because as I've said before, all these polls are about are two things. One, for the pollsters who take them, and two, for the candidates, so that they have an idea of what they need to do more of and where they need to go in terms of the communities that they are looking at these polls from. That's who the polls are for. The polls are not for the voting public. Those polls, again, are designed to influence the general public into a choice that they should or should not make. That's what the polls do for the public, and that's dangerous because the polls are often wrong and very misleading. And in fact, the reason why polls should not be paid attention to is because they only account for a small snapshot in time, usually about 3 or 4 days. And the margin of error, obviously, is something that can be an issue. And if you pay attention to these polls that show your candidate up by 10, then when the next poll comes out and shows your candidate only up by 1, what happens to you? You obviously start to get a little bit nervous, to say the least. And you don't need that right now. You don't need that additional anxiety. Unless that's something you do. You glub onto that, and that's something about that feeds you somehow. I don't know if that applies to you, but there are people in the world who need that to fuel them somehow. Ignore the polls. Ignore the polls. I've said this before, I'll say it again. Ignore the polls. Instead, focus on getting people out to vote, whether that's having meetings with them on Zoom, whether it is sending out text reminders daily to people, asking them if they've voted or not, or asking them, have they registered to vote, asking them, have they early voted, or telling them, early vote. Please. That's where the level of activity has to be now. Instead of all of this talk that I said earlier, all this noise that gets thrown around. Really, I really mean this. Ignore these polls. It will drive you crazy. It really will. And I know people aren't going to listen. Some people will listen to that and ignore them. But a lot of people are going to go, well, I want to see what the race is like. All of this energy is not good. It's very toxic energy to be focusing on a poll and getting involved in all the media pollsters and what this one says on that network, what Nate Silver says, who. I'm telling you, you're going to stress yourself out even more if you do it. You're going to have additional levels of stress that are unhealthy. And you already have stress levels in this country that are unhealthy for us. Somebody who's literally destroying the country. And you've got a small segment, but a very loud segment of violent people who are now being given permission to help destroy the country and end the lives of people in the process. And you've got police departments doing it too, giving license to this by their own actions and non-actions when it comes to allowing terrorists, killers, to walk on by. Those are not good cops. And if you think there's good cops, there's something good about a police officer who is sworn to uphold the law and sworn to serve and protect everyone, if you think there's something good about that particular cop allowing someone who's just killed people right in front of him, basically, when people are screaming and saying, hey, look, this guy over here just killed someone. If you think there's something good about that cop, well, you have to really look yourself in the mirror. So there's levels of stress. You don't know where your next, I don't know what your situation is, but there's people out here who don't know where their next meal's coming from, much less whether they can keep a roof over their head. You've got all of these people who are worried about eviction, and here in California, the governor here, just yesterday, and to his credit, and I'm glad he's done this because I have some criticisms of Gavin Newsom. He's just not being taken to task in the media locally or nationally the way I think he should be. But just yesterday, he signed a bill that forbade. I'm getting the tense wrong. Am I getting the tense wrong on that? He signed a bill into law. I guess it's maybe an executive order or a bill, whatever it was. But he signed this directive that prevents landlords from evicting people over the next 5 months. And also from foreclosing, from preventing any foreclosures in the state of California over these next 5 months until, through January, up until January. What is that? It's about 5 months, isn't it? 4 months? About 4 months, whatever it is. It's about 4 months or so. How many governors have done something like that? I mean, there may be one or two who have. There may be some mayors who've done it. But how many? How many Republican governors have done that? Gavin Newsom is a Democratic governor out of California, here in California. But how many Republican governors have done anything like that? Remember, the Republican Party is the party that walked out of negotiations. Mitch McConnell was not there. Mitch McConnell, who is running for Senate in Kentucky for re-election this coming November, was not even in on the negotiations for additional stimulus checks. He left Washington, D.C. He wasn't even on Capitol Hill. He wasn't even in D.C. The only Republicans who were anywhere near any negotiation for a second stimulus check and a stimulus package, another stimulus package, were Mark Meadows, who is the White House Chief of Staff for Donald Trump, or is the White House Chief of Staff, period. I keep saying for him, that's where we got to, right? That we're actually talking in that kind of language. Oh, Donald Trump is stoking violence. And we're talking about that so casually now. That should tell you something about where this country is. We just talk. One day we're talking about, oh my goodness, Hillary Clinton's lost. And in the next breath, albeit separated by 2 or 3 years, we're just casually talking about, well, he's stoking up violence. He's stirring violence. He's defending. I mean, do you see how dangerous that is and how quickly that has happened? I mean, it didn't happen overnight. This has been coming for decades. But do you see just in these last 3.5 years how quickly we've gone from, oh my goodness, Hillary Clinton lost the Electoral College, to Donald Trump is stirring up violence and encouraging violence. Do you know how quick that went? In the blink of an eye. That is how fragile democracy is. That is how fragile it is. Democracy is only as strong as the people who participate in it. And it is such a fragile thing. And yes, some of us have not seen any real democracy at all in this country. We just haven't. And so this is where I'm coming to. The point I'm making here is that change will happen, but it will only happen when you advocate for it, like people are doing in the streets of this country, all over this country. And the media only now looks at protest when it deals with something that Trump has done. That's the way the media is now, and the way it has been for quite some time. Or it will only look at something to do with a protest when someone set a building on fire or a car on fire. Because they are aiming at a particular audience. When there were these very peaceful, joyous celebrations yesterday held by Jacob Blake's family, you hardly saw any video or pictures of it. There are people dancing in the street in Kenosha, Wisconsin. You never saw any real video of it. There were some brief shots of it. But did you know that the Jacob Blake family put on a few blocks long block party, and they were all celebrating and dancing and having voter registration drives and handing out information about voting, and people were dancing and eating and having fun, having a drink, and this is put on by Jacob Blake's family. Now, where was that in the media? Where was that on these news broadcasts? And of the one that I saw that covered it, it was just a quick couple of photos, couple of video shots, just brief video of it. You didn't see anybody dancing and joyous. I mean, you've got to understand, if you want to cover this, cover it for real. And let's not show these snap images and then don't say that this family put this stuff on. And then even if you do say it, don't show the joy that even amongst this pain, amidst this pain, there is a sense of determination and community spirit. Change is going to happen in this country. And the people who are fighting violently, these rogue people who have always been there before Trump got in, and they're going to be there after he's gone. They are fighting for survival of their own racist, violent, misogynistic agenda. That's what they're up to. They don't even have a real agenda other than let's get rid of people who don't look like us. The tide is turning in this country, and it's not going to be stopped. There may still be a price for people to pay. And we're seeing people paying that price right now because of these violent thugs who are going around, and they are organized, whether it's by Putin, whether it's by rich families, whether it's by these racist groups on Facebook, who are terrorizing people. But they are fighting a battle now that I think they're going to lose. Because you now have a number of white people in this country who have finally woken up. And I think everybody sees what's going on now. And I think that you are going to have a tidal wave of change in this country in November. It will start there, but it will not be the end of it. We saw this victory, and that's why I started out with Ed Markey. We saw Ed Markey's victory, which was not surprising. It was more about Kennedy losing than it was really Markey winning, because Kennedy had never lost in Massachusetts in all the times that they have had political elections. This was a runoff election, a primary or a runoff primary election. We've seen this a couple of, in the last few weeks, last month with Cori Bush in Missouri, winning that seat. The first black woman to win that primary. I mean, she's going to be going into Congress as the first black female congresswoman of that District 1 in Missouri because she's going to beat her Republican opponent. I mean, that's been a solidly Democratic district for a long time. She knocked off the guy whose family had controlled that district and had been in that seat in that district for 50 years. That's change. Cori Bush is a progressive, and that's change. That's an example of it. Not only that, on the same night, there were a majority of people in Missouri who voted for an expansion on the amendment for Medicaid. You would never have seen that happen just 5 or 10 years ago. But because of this pandemic, people have decided enough is enough. And they've decided that I am fed up of being in my home, being told that I don't count. I'm going to the polls and I'll tell you what I think about what you're saying. And I'm going to vote for life-affirming things that not only help me, but also help you. And that's what these voters did in Missouri just last month. And now they're going to pass that bill into law if they haven't already. That will become either effective immediately or in January. In Missouri, we've seen this in other initiatives in other states. We've seen victories by progressive politicians in other states, whether it's Marie Newman in Illinois, whether it is Jamal Bowman in New York, a great victory for him there, knocking off Elliot Engel, who had been in that seat since the early 1990s or late 1980s. We've seen these victories all over the country. We've seen these things. This is happening. This is change. We are seeing more black and brown politicians. And when that happens, you get these racists. These white racists will react to that. But this has already been won in a way. Because you now have people who are white, who are still deciding, change is what we need. And we are fed up of these lies that the Republican Party tells us. We are fed up of them. And there's going to be more, I think, of that in November. However, we've got to get out there and do the work. You are going to see a Democratic Senate control. I think that will definitely happen. The Democratic Party needs 4 seats. If the Democratic Party wins a net of 4 seats on election night, they will control the Senate. No more Mitch McConnell blocking things that you need. No more Mitch McConnell leaving election security to wither away when the House Democrats passed it a year and a half plus ago. No more of this blocking of stimulus bills and checks. No more of any of that happening. Education. No more of education being left on the desk of the Grim Reaper. That's what you're fighting for this November, folks. We're talking a lot about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and I've done that. But what I will continue to do and do more of in these next few days and weeks is to talk about these Senate races and these House races and the importance of voting down ballot all the way down to your local races. Do not leave any of these races out. Do not leave the race in the White House out. Do not leave the Senate race out, the governor's race out, the House race out, the dog catcher race out. Do not leave those out. Do not be that voter that says, well, I'm just going to vote for the locals and I'll vote for the Senate and governor, but I'm going to leave the White House empty. No, no, no. You vote in every single race. And quite frankly, you vote Democratic. Because the Republicans just have not governed. They have stalled. They have blocked. Just like they blocked Obama through 8 years. They obstructed him. Mitch McConnell makes jokes about that. So now is the time for you and me and every one of us to be part of this change. It's coming, it's happening, but we have to do it in a resounding way. The world really is watching us. And where we used to be laughed at and mocked under George W. Bush, the war criminal, who somehow is being so fondly remembered in some quarters, we are now being pitied. We are now being despaired. We are now being looked at sadly by much of the rest of the world. And we have to be the last line of defense here between a country and a complete, total authoritarian autocracy and dictatorial takeover, which is what is happening, by the way. This November, we are the last line of defense, we the people. The people that the so-called founding fathers, who had black people as property right next to them, basically, as they were writing these documents. We the people, those are the first three words of the Constitution. And they aren't the first three words of the Constitution by accident. We the people. The Republican Senate failed you. They allowed this dangerous, criminal, orange human being to skate last February. Just 7 months ago, they allowed that to happen in the Senate during that sham trial that Mitch McConnell was presiding over. They sat there and they acquitted this guy when we all saw the crime. We all know that this guy abused his power when he made that phone call to the president of Ukraine. We all know that. Openly inviting countries to interfere. Oh, well, you know, if you can just have a press conference to say something about the Bidens, Hunter Biden, if you can just announce a press conference, do that on CNN. Now how the hell? And Fareed Zakaria, you've got something to answer for as well. Mr. Globalist, and I'm in the global public square. And you were going to be one of the people, you were going to interview the Ukrainian president, and he was going to tell you that there's an investigation of Hunter, but really that was being contemplated? Now you know why I cast my eyes suspiciously at a lot of the corporate news media. Even though I'm now watching it again, I'm watching it for a reason. Because I know that most people watch those networks. The people who watch news watch those networks. And they certainly watch Fox, which is a despicable network. I mean, Laura Ingraham, for God's sake, had to correct Donald Trump and say, no, you don't mean that, do you? I mean, what interviewer does that, right? What interviewer who interviews somebody actually has to say to them, well, you're not comparing, well, I mean, some interviewers do, but yet had to help him through an interview. What interviewer do you know has to help somebody through an interview? The person that they're interviewing, that they have to help them through the interview? What kind of interview is that? See, that's the larger thing as I divert a little bit here. Never mind the fact, as bad as it is, that Donald Trump said those things and those despicable things in that interview that he did with Laura Ingraham. But that Laura Ingraham, surprise, surprise, on Fox News, has to actually tell him, well, you don't mean that, you mean this, feeding him answers. You can't take that network seriously. That's the overview. That's the big picture. You can't. And I know people who say, well, you know, I watch it because I want to see what's going on. Well, you should see what's going on. We know what's going on. It's happening right in front of us. It's been going on for 40 years. At least. And no one talks about Reagan. He's as much a problem here as anybody. And these neoliberals too. Bill Clinton has a lot to do with this. To an extent, Obama does, to a lesser extent, but he does. But it's really those individuals, whether it's George W., George H.W., Bill Clinton, to some degree, for sure. And of course, Trump, and of course, W., and of course, Reagan. This did not happen overnight. We, the people, have to be the ones now to stand up for this country. And we have to decide that the country is worth saving. And not only that, it's worth improving. Because it is. Because this country really is worth improving. The world is watching us. And we cannot afford to be complacent. Get out there and vote. Make sure you early vote. And make sure you tell people to vote. Check in on them. Make sure that you do everything you can to make sure that we don't have to go through this nightmare ever again in this country. Thank you very much for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.